Well, here it is, a video I have wanted to make for a long time, but have been afraid to do it for multiple reasons, but I need to start putting this on the back burner. So here it is, a video on why the second half of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds sucks. Now listen, I like 5Ds. It is up there for one of my fave Yu-Gi-Oh! Series, but I ain't no glazer. I'm not gonna pretend this was peak Yu-Gi-Oh! Or anything. Maybe if it ended after the Dark Signers arc, it would be, but it didn't, and it spiraled to the point where I was like, am I even still watching the same damn series? It was a huge departure from something that was incredible. Not saying the first part of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds didn't have its flaws, but it knew what it was and what it wanted to be, while the second half just feels like a whole different series entirely. Now I get that people absolutely glorify the heck out of this series and don't want to hear anything to the contrary. It has the best MC, the best rival, the best girl. It was cool because it was mature. Surely the amount of glazing this series gets is ridiculous, and either people forget the huge flaws or accept them and don't treat them as actual flaws because they love the series so much. Which to me just screams toxic fandom. Being a fan of something is not just accepting everything as it is also acknowledging the negatives as well, not pretending they don't exist. So I like 5Ds, but come on, that second half was filled with more garbage than the satellite. The first half of 5Ds was a very character-driven series that took place in a dystopic society fractured by a class system, which seamlessly incorporated dual monsters as the driving force for the series and even took a dynamic approach of incorporating writing duels as well. It had a unique setting, plot, and served to be a strong character-centric piece that made you understand the characters that were heavily fleshed out and made you want to know more about the characters that still had a hint of obscurity. The first part of 5Ds cared about showcasing who are the signers, how they interact with this world, each other, and even their enemies. Just look at the Dark Signers. They're not just villains, they to a degree mean something to the heroes they're facing. Kiryu has a past with Yusei, Jack is in love with Carly, Misty wants to get revenge on Aki, Demek is harming the spirit world, and Ruka needs to stop his ambitions while Rua fights in his sister's stead. Crow and Bomber are both individuals who care for orphans in a world that has been unfair to them, but one of them is now on a thorny path. Roger is the brother of Rex and even the fifth signer chosen by the Crimson Dragon. These relations add a sort of tension to each final confrontation between the signers, their allies, and the Dark Signers. The series shows how the setting influences motivations and generally gets the audience to wonder, how can this horrible caste system between the people of the satellite who live in poverty and constantly at the mercy of security and the well-off people of Neo Domino City come to a happy conclusion, and how can our heroes who are from both worlds bring about this change? And that is not all that we wonder. We wonder what happens to the signers after completing their mission. What about the cult running things in the shadows? What of the spirit world? And how are psychic duels going to be prevalent to the overall scope of the series? Well, too bad, because the second half of 5Ds doesn't care about being deep into the characters or society anymore. It takes a huge 180 and not for the best. Not saying the second half of 5Ds has nothing going for it. I absolutely love the idea of the final boss of the series being the future version of the protagonist who has lost all hope and resorts to drastic actions to save the world and confront his younger, more optimistic self who has not been beaten by the harshest of realities yet. And Masaki Endo's Clear Mind till this day will be the best Yu-Gi-Oh! Insert song, followed by Roa's song in Yu-Gi-Oh! 7s. Also, for you dub-only watchers, I feel bad you were denied that banger. Till this day, Shooting Star Dragon being summoned for the first time to Clear Mind still gives me goosebumps even over a decade later. And yeah, I watched the dub version of the summon and nah, don't even argue that it hits the same. But that aside, holy hell, this part of 5Ds is a masterclass on how not to follow up on a good season. You could definitely tell there was a direction change and can tell that Kazuki Takahashi no longer had input in what was happening like he did earlier on in the series. And with Takahashi out of the project, I guess that left Ono and the bane of Yu-Gi-Oh! Shin Yoshida to do their thing. And I'll give credit where it's due, Yoshida did some good work like with the Zeo anime, but his track record has more negatives than positives. He's essentially the Vince Russo of Yu-Gi-Oh! Seriously, put me in a writing contest with Shin Yoshida and I can make a way better Yu-Gi-Oh! Series than him. That is not a front. I bet you I can do better. Jump Fest, me and Yoshida, pitch a Yu-Gi-Oh! Series, make it happen, I bet you I'll beat him. But to see how bad things have gotten, let's start with the characters, because nothing represents how far things have fallen better than the characters. Trust me, the plot and the once intriguing setting suffers as well, but trust me, I will get to those. but the big one is the freaking characters, because what happened here? Like, how and why? I think it's only proper we start off talking about the main character, Yugioh, who's just there, which I think is fair to say. He's not really much worse than he was in part 1, yet brings nothing new to the table. What you got in part 1 is what you get now when it comes to the character aspect. Sure, his deck changed, but as an actual character and personality, you don't really get anything new from this guy. But you figured there will be at least some more to this character aside from just, you know, changing up some cards in his deck. He doesn't really have anything outside of solving the main missions. Like, what is Yugioh's goal in life? What is he supposed to do? I mean, this is our main character, for goodness sakes. When he's called a nothing burger of a character, it kind of rings true to him. And the worst part is, there's so much growth you can do with him. He's the son of Dr. Fudo, the man whose research led to the Zero-Verse incident. Why not have an arc of his character being trying to clear his father's name? Maybe even make him delve into his father's research, which will later on be used in order to solve the incident that destroys the future, instead of the series just doing a time jump and saying, well, Yugioh and his team just solved this problem that people in the future couldn't solve. Like, have his father leave behind certain codes that Yugioh takes his time to actually try to decode, and with this knowledge he can use that to solve the issue that the people of the future couldn't do because they didn't have access to the same exact tool that he does now. I mean, seriously, give him something other than just dueling and solving the immediate issues of the series. Like, who is this guy when the world is not in danger? Overall, Yugioh is just disappointing, but still so much more well off than other characters. Other characters like the King, Jack Atlas. Okay, here we go. This is when the crap starts to hit the fan and my voice starts to get higher, because now we're getting into some of the more egregious crap that people need to get locked up for. Let's talk about freaking Jack. He's a bum. He mooches off his buddies. He is entitled and drinks at a cafe all day while 3 women crush on him in the distance. Mina, some waitress chick, and Carly. Wait, Carly? I'm sorry, weren't these two in love at the end of part 1? Didn't Jack love her so much he was willing to not defeat her? Even if it was a battle he absolutely needed to win so he can stop the resurrection of the king of the underworld? The Darksiders are put so much into building that relationship between those two, and now it's like it never even happened for Jack. Even if Carly lost her memories, you would think Jack would not give in and maybe see if he could make her remember what she lost and how she changed him as a person after he felt so lost after losing his title as king. But I guess the showrunners thought it would be so hilarious if he was just bottom feeding off his friends drinking coffee all day. Like, look at that cool guy who refuses to work because he's so rich. Seriously, they treat the guy like he has been rich and entitled his entire life. The dude grew up and lived in the satellite most of his life as an orphan, and they play him off as if he's too good to work now. Also, hello? Isn't he rich? Because Goodwin is gone, he doesn't have money or something? That's not how that works, and this is downhill from a character perspective. The once main rival of Yugioh is regular to just being a guy who can take a casual L. Seriously, what is this man doing losing to a fake version of himself and Bomber's younger sibling? Come on, he went from being a Kaiba to a Chaz real quick. So yeah, as a duelist he is strong, but he doesn't have the luster he had in part 1. Character wise, he's just a bum who does nothing. He doesn't try to win back the woman who was taken from him, or even do other things like understand Rex, who was like a father to him, or even try to right his wrongs, or even try to understand the intentions of the Yoliaster group. I mean, he does nothing. He just hangs out at a cafe or duels. He's not as cool, intense, or motivated as he was in part 1, which makes sense because characters be damned in part 2. They don't want you to care about depth. They just want you to show you some brand new cards. So forget about romance, forget about actual character development, and speaking of characters who exist to sell cards, here's Crow. Remember him? The everyday guy like you and me who got tossed into a supernatural battle between gods and dragons he had no right to be a part of, but because he has a never give up attitude and he was a badass, he confronted Darksiders Bomber and even helped Yugioh and Jack defeat Rex. Well, now he's a signer for some reason. You know, that thing you were supposed to be born as? Crow just being a guy who is an awesome duelist is not good enough anymore. Gotta make him a signer, and you know what? He can get Yusei's mark, and Yugioh will now have the dragon's head mark because Yusei is the main character, and even though the signers don't have a rank system of leadership, so why switch Yusei's mark anyway? I don't get that. But who cares? Because Crow is now a signer. But come on, he can't be a signer without a dragon, so we will just give him a dragon and say it was in his bike the whole time. That makes perfect sense, but it is not a signer dragon, just a dragon card. Or is it? Because they're just going to retcon scenes of the past and now include Blackwing Dragon in it. Which raises the question, if this is a signer dragon, why didn't Rex look for it? The previous owner of the card used Blackwing Dragon. Wouldn't the data of the card being used be known to Rex? But of course it wasn't, because it is only just now that Blackwing Dragon is a signer dragon. Which also raises another question. Why didn't it make itself known to Crow when he was battling against Dark Signers? Even if Crow wasn't a signer at the time, you would figure Blackwing Dragon would want to help defeat the Earthbound Immortals. Heck, it even has an effect to block effect damage, which is the specialty of Bomber's Earthbound Immortals, so it would have been incredibly helpful. But screw consistent storytelling, we just need that man to have a dragon. This was so damn stupid. He didn't need to be a signer. Crow was fine as is. Yes, they pushed him too much at times, especially compared to the twins and Aki, but when it comes to the show creators, who cares? Because we gotta sell those Blackwing cards, am I right? So his character be damned as well. Granted, again, he's one of the ones that came off not as bad in this series. If anything, Crow is one of the ones who came off pretty well, all things considered, so he's pretty lucky. But let's talk about the character that Crow essentially replaced as the marquee third main character of the series, Aki. Bruh. This is the one, people. This is the one that's going to break me, so hold on tight. Aki in part 2 is just a bench warmer that we hardly see do anything, and for the most part is removed from the series, and she is removed of anything that makes her special. Aki was a character that had momentum and levels of progression. You can say her progression is in 3 steps. A, B, and C. First is A. She started off as someone at odds with her powers as a psychic duelist and was being manipulated to the point where she relished in using her powers to hurt people. Then we move on to B. She then moved on to accepting her powers and becoming a better person who no longer rejects who she is and can move forward, and now take a long pause before we get to C. Heck, we don't even get to see C play out. We just get the ending of C, because her progression ends in part 2 of 5Ds, because guess what? Her powers are now gone. Just because. My theory was they didn't really want Aki to be special anymore and wanted to rely more on Yusei, Jack, and Crow to resolve conflicts. But this loss of her powers puts a huge pin on her progression to part C, especially when you know the endgame of the character, who becomes a doctor who uses her powers to help people. So yes, C is supposed to be Aki utilizing her powers for good, but because her powers are gone, we don't get that. There's no build for this character anymore. She's just passing by hotness, that's it. Her most unique character trait is gone. She only has 3 duels in all of part 2, and only one of which is a straight up 1v1. And of course in the other duel she's teaming up with Crow, which is ironic, and in the other she's just being a total embarrassment against Team Unicorn. She's also been regulated to just being in school and will be on screen sometimes, but not in any plot defining role, because this is the Yusei, Jack, and Crow show now. So Aki, go to school, bye bye. Alright, so this is Aki in a nutshell now. She has no powers, hardly duels, and does frick off screen. She is a shell of her former self, because this part doesn't care about character development anymore. If it did, we would actually see Aki develop as a character instead of this stopgap progression of her character. So instead of actually seeing Aki attempt to use her powers for the greater good, we just get a time skip at the end that tells us she's doing that. The traditional tell, don't show method. I don't want to hear that, well, her character progression happened in the hospital when she was taking care of that girl when the ghost army attacked. Because guess what? If she had her powers, she could have more adequately protected the girl, which leads to the end game of the character anyway. It would have been so much more interesting to see Aki want to do better with her powers, but because the way she utilized them for offensive means for so long, she makes mistakes and ends up doing more harm than good, and needs the encouragement of others to get her to keep trying to shake off the habits ingrained to her by Divine. But we get nothing. Maybe even have some mental struggles, thinking that maybe that she was mistaken and that she can only ever use her powers to be utilized as a weapon, and maybe down the line put her in a situation where then she can awaken to using her powers in a defensive way that can actually help people. This type of progression for Aki, realizing that she can use her once dangerous powers to help people, could even be applied to an arc surrounding the Arcadia movement, which is all but forgotten about in the series. Sure, Divine is gone, but his teachings are probably still being followed by students he was able to sway. This whole institution of psychic power duels is just gone like that. It would have been so much more interesting for Aki to confront the Arcadia movement, who want to rebel after their precious instructor, who they believe gave them a path in life, was taken from them. Aki needs to convince the students who were like her that Divine's teachings were wrong and he took advantage of their vulnerable mental states. The students of the Arcadia movement can see her as a traitor of sorts and want to get revenge on her for essentially leading to his death, which leads to Aki to duel against these students, but instead of using her powers like them, she refuses to hurt them and taking all their attacks, as well as utilize her monsters to protect the city from the damage caused by the Arcadia students. One by one, she's able to convince the students that what they are doing is wrong, and even have her 5D's companions be by her side as she tries to quell down the rebellion. After long duels and being able to push down the rebellion of the Arcadia movement, they can come to understand Aki. And now the once great weapon of the Arcadia movement is now the big sister that they all look up to and want to learn from, so they can use their powers the right way, just like she's trying to. And no longer use their powers the way Divine taught them, a man who preyed on their abilities so that he can satisfy his own ambitions. With this, the Arcadia movement and Divine's teachings are finally put to rest, and Aki, after a lot of struggles, is able to finally move into the path of utilizing her abilities to help and cure people and no longer be a weapon. So when we get to the time jump of her being a doctor, we as viewers were part of the journey that got her there, as opposed to the series just saying, well, here she is now. I seriously don't understand how people defend her treatment in part 2. It is like they're doing mental gymnastics to defend something they know is crap. I understand liking a character and wanting to defend them, but if you actually like Aki, then you should be appalled by her treatment in part 2, not trying to justify it. She was arguably one of the most interesting characters in the series, regulated to a nobody character in the background. And no, I don't want to hear her VA had other roles so she couldn't do the part. You know how many VAs have multiple roles at a single time, both in anime and live action? Some might even want to blame a scandal, which I won't get into, because the solution that I have for this is the same whether the scandal allegations are true or not, and that is recast her. If the VA can't do her duties as needed, then don't make the character suffer by putting her in the background. Honestly, if whatever reasons you think Aki's VA couldn't do work in 5Ds was an issue with Yusei, Jack, or Crow's VA, do you think Studio Gallup would have toned down the on-screen time of any of those characters? No, because they valued those characters. If Aki's VA troubles were going to impact the character, she should have been recast, but the fact that she was regulated to a background character means they didn't value her character enough the way they would have if the same situation applied to Yusei, Jack, or Crow's VA. They wasted Aki, period, and it was so sad to see. So please stop making excuses because you like Black Rose Dragon on her deck, or because you're so down bad for her because she's the hottest Yu-Gi-Oh girl in the whole franchise. None of that is a good reason to defend what Aki had became in 5D's Part 2. If you are a fan of Aki the way I am, you should hate the injustice to our girl, not condoning the injustice to this once amazing character who had all the makings to be one of the best characters in all of Yu-Gi-Oh, who is now one of the biggest missed opportunities in Yu-Gi-Oh. Now for the twins Rua and Ruka, and for the sake of the video, I'll just refer to them as Leo and Luna, since I have a feeling people are just gonna get confused by those names, especially if you only watch the dub. I'm pretty sure many of you don't even know which one is Rua and which one is Ruka. Leo is there. Nothing fascinating is done with him. He just exists to exist. Honestly, he was so underutilized that I was thinking he was never actually going to become the missing signer, especially when you see at the end of part 1 that all the signers have been revealed. Then there's Luna, who honestly probably has it worse than Aki. There was zero care for this character. How can you have a character that has a spirit monster like Judai? Heck, she even has the Karibo of the series and absolutely nothing is done with her. Her abilities to connect with spirit monsters means nothing to the series, and you could tell how little she mattered when you look at her deck. Honestly, her deck has zero direction. What does her deck do? What is its purpose? It's just cards. Even Chaz was able to make a deck with VWXYZ, Arm Dragon, and Ojamas make sense, but Luna's deck is just terrible mismatch of nothingness. And if you want the biggest example of zero crap given about her as a duelist, look at part 2 of 5Ds. Do you guys remember the popular plant tuner monster Spore? If I asked you who used this plant support tuner in 5Ds, I'm sure 99% of you would say Aki, the plant duelist. But no, it's Luna for some reason. She just had random plant support for no reason other than I guess to make more plant support cards, and since they weren't using Aki, they probably figured this would be a good opportunity to release that support. The twins in general have been handicapped in the series. Their aces, Ancient Fairy Dragon and Power Tool Dragon, have a focus on field spells and equip spells. Both are cards that players can't use in writing duels, so right out of the gate their cards are useless in the most used format of the series. At least the manga got things right. There is no speed world, so they can utilize their strategies to their best potential. They were also a single unit duelist, with Leo riding the D-wheel and playing the cards while Luna was the strategist and ordered the plays. They also had a unified deck where Luna had cute forest monsters and field spells to support them, and Leo would use Mortronic equipped spells to augment the monsters to make them battle ready. And with equips and field spells in full effect in the 5D's manga, their dual dragons could be fully optimized. I suggest reading the manga because Leo and Luna's portrayal in the manga was incredibly well done, and you could tell the writer knew how to fix those characters from a personality and dueling standpoint. Oh, so you thought the character segment was done, right? Just because I got through all the signers? No, I gotta at least put in one more character. I got to mention Sherry, the woman whose story was abandoned. Sherry was a character that had a pretty good start. She was filling a void that Yusei had missing, and that was a rival character. Yes, Jack is Yusei's rival, but at this point he's in a very deep companionship role in the series next to Yusei, and Yusei didn't really have a rival that can oppose him. So Sherry was looking like she was going to fill that role that Jack left behind. She was also similar to Yusei, both had a very heavy focus on warrior type monsters, and she even had a synchron monster as well. It felt like they were really going for a female counterpart to Yusei and give him that rival that can push him. Even in their first duel, it was left undecided. I was under the impression this would be something really cool leading up to an epic clash in a tournament or something, but nope. Sherry just popped in and out as the writers needed. Heck, they even made her lose to the Diablo army. Sherry seemed like she would be a pivotal character in part 2, especially since there is this mystery of her parents being killed for the Zone card, but we never got a concrete answer as to why the card is so important and that why her family was killed over it. Apparently the only person who knows is now gone, and that's it. Why was this card so important that a high-ranking figure in Neo Domino City risked going to prison to kill a super rich family? And even if he's gone, the reason should still exist as to why the card is so important, and some might say that this is good storytelling, to have Sherry's only lead to her family's death disappear, and now she's unable to carry out her vengeance, and understand why she had to go through such hardships. But in all honesty, I don't think the writers had a payoff for Sherry's arc. I think they started something without a roadmap and landed to this conclusion for her. Why not make the Zone card pivotal to the plot, such as making the card a sort of key that is necessary to transport the arc cradle to the past? That would have actually given some sort of credible reason as to why Sherry's family was killed and make her a key player in the plot. Instead, her story is thrown away and now she's just one of the bad guys. The Zone card is literally named after the main antagonist of the series, and it has zero relation to him or his plans. The whole existence of that card is a letdown. I honestly thought it would be an incredibly powerful card that the Yugioh group absolutely needs, and it was just nothing, just a card, a no-purpose item that served to do nothing in the greater scheme of things. There is so much that could have been done with Sherry and her past and how it relates to the plans of the 3 emperors of Yugioh, but nope, she's just wasted as a character. I wonder if she was like Luna in the Zio manga, mandated to be in the series, and Yoshida did as told but opted not to utilize her. Not saying that is the case, but it really does feel like she is a character made out of obligation as opposed to necessity, and that is a shame. But how can I be surprised by this? After all, this is Yu-Gi-Oh! 5D's Part 2. Alright, that's enough about the characters. Let us move on to the dystopic setting fueled by the clash of the class system between the residents of Neo Domino City and the satellite. You see, after Rex Goodwin's defeat in Part 1, there was a change in leadership, and now things are okay between the residents and moving to a more cohesive existence. No! No! That is not how discrimination works, damn it. You don't just have a regime change and just like that everyone's prejudices and feeling of oppressions just disappear. You have to work on that. This is so infuriating because they took a very complex issue between classes, and instead of showing what happens when you try to collapse that system and how to make society a better place and dispel the negativity between the two classes, the writers just pressed the button and said everything's good now. Society and mindsets don't just shift like that. It is like the story was written by children that think you could speedrun healing a fractured society just by changing one person in charge. But you know what? I bet they actually knew that. The issue is that they would have actually had to tape a deep dive into this story, and they don't do that anymore. They need that time to run a super long tournament and introduce God cards because that sells. Forget about this interesting society that you've been projecting onto us since Part 1. You just got rid of it. I mean, seriously, through the characters, they could have actually told the story of this new version of Neo Domino City and how they worked to change it. Like, for example, remember Yusei's good friend Rally? If you do, then you are a better person than Yusei, because in part 2, he didn't even acknowledge the existence of his satellite friends. But my point is that the character can be used to show how the new setting works. Like, have him attend the same duel academy as Leo and Luna, and maybe while there he gets bullied because he is not one of the well-off kids and used to be in the satellite, making him feel as if he is not wanted and only allowed to attend this school because of Lazarus' plans to change the city. Then you can have Leo and Luna come to his aid and defend him, showing the other kids that it's not right to pick on the satellite students. You can even increase the friction of this by maybe having Rally not being trusting of the twins and letting them know they're only pitying him because he's friends with the champion Yusei. This can lead to Yusei letting Rally know that there are good people in Neo Domino City who can be trusted, and that the twins helped him when they first met him, even though he was a person for the satellite and had a mark from the detention center. This now shows Rally that maybe he shouldn't be like his bullies, and maybe actually try to befriend the twins and not discriminate against the people from Neo Domino City, thinking that they are all the same and look down on him. This can also lead to Rally and Leo maybe even teaming up in a duel to go against some of the people that bullied him. Heck, make one of the bullies slide. Remember that kid who was obsessed with Stardust Dragon? It looked like they were building to a confrontation between him and Yusei that never happened? Well, how about having him actually steal Stardust Dragon and have Leo and Rally team to beat him, and a partner to not just get Stardust Dragon back, but also to earn the respect of the people who look down on Rally. You can even show this change from the perspective of someone who always lived in Neo Domino City. Maybe have Yugioh try to make up for who he was in the past as an officer who relished in bringing in satellite members to the detention center, now wanting to give back and apologize to those he's wronged. But instead, the writers took the interesting progression of the series, crumbled it into a ball, and just tossed it into a garbage pail, because why tell the story of how things were being resolved when you could just say it has been resolved? Even Arc 5 felt like they handled the Synchro Dimensions class system between the tops and commons better than what 5Ds did. They did much like with Aki's progression: tell, don't show, which is always the worst thing you can do in media. And now for the plot, which is arguably the least offensive thing about 5Ds, and that's definitely saying something. Overall, you got some guys from the future coming to the past to destroy Neo Domino City to prevent a larger disaster in the future. I get it, and it makes sense, and it is pretty compelling in all honesty when you look at it on paper. But there is so much weirdness in this part. Like, the driving force of this arc is the Mech Lords, who are these frightening monsters that counter Synchro monsters. Yet, every time Yusei faces one, he wins! And despite him beating a Mech Lord before, he needs to be taught Excel Synchro to counter them? Again, here he beat a Mech Lord. So while Excel Synchro is more reliable than the Crimson Dragon helping out, the threat of the Mech Lords fell flat. It is even more ridiculous when you realize that Yusei always had a Mech Lord counter called Turbo Warrior. Then we also have this really huge and long tournament, and trust me, I love tournaments. Overall, I think most of this was fun to watch, but like many other things in this part, it has hiccups, like the first duel of the tournament where Team 5Ds would have lost if Gene just ended his damn turn. The tournament also wanted to surprise us, the viewers, in the most inept ways possible. Like, for example, when Team 5Ds was facing Team Taiyo, and all our main characters in the audience were surprised to see that Taiyo's strategy was to summon Zushin, which is cool until you realize this is round 3 and Team Taiyo won their first 2 matches. So are we to believe they never summoned Zushin in their first 2 matches despite all 3 players' decks revolving around this single strategy to summon Zushin? That makes no sense unless they won without Zushin, and if they did, that would mean their opponents were trash because Team Taiyo's win condition is protecting weak monsters to summon Zushin. Did they beat their last 2 opponents with Key Mace or something? Seriously, how are we going into round 3 and Team 5Ds in the audience don't know Team Taiyo's strategy? That makes no sense at all. Then we have Team Ragnarok and God cards that come out of nowhere. We don't even learn about them until round 3 of the tournament. I mean, have you seen the Azers when they're summoned? They're freaking huge. How has Team 5Ds never noticed these giant gods summoned before? This was clearly just a cool idea someone had, but didn't know how to implement it in a way that actually makes sense. These are cards that should have been established to exist a while back. Maybe even have Team Ragnarok debut at the end of part 1 of 5Ds because they were on their way to use the power of the gods to stop Rex and the god of the underworld, but the signers have already taken care of things. That plants the seeds that these powerful duelists are in the world, instead of just being like, hey, these 3 amazing guys with God cards are now just here all of a sudden. But these 2 things are small potatoes compared to Team New World being able to use a power to falsify history and go back and change the course of history. This was insane, and I don't think many people talk about how ridiculous it is that they had this ability. Let me repeat that. They can change history. Let me just tell you what these guys did with this ability. They prevented Clark, the man who killed Sherry's parents, from ever being born. Yet her parents are still dead. And let me repeat, they changed history so a man could never be born. They altered time, so they took the spot of Sherry's team in the tournament. They made themselves the directors of public security and stole a photo shoot for Team Ragnarok, which is odd. This is some godly level stuff they probably should have used to, you know, stop their adversaries like Team Ragnarok and Team 5Ds. Now, I know the signers and those with the rune marks gain protection from this, but to what degree? I mean, they manipulated Ragnarok's past to make them not on the cover of the Duel magazine, so this does work on them in some way, shape, or form. Now, I get that Zone couldn't use this power to, let's say, get rid of Yusei because that would ruin the future and not make Yusei the hero in his future. But I'm sure there were other ways they could have used this power to really put some pressure on their enemies. They can completely change the course of history. This was such a stupid thing that was allowed to exist because it is so overpowered. It raises questions as to why they couldn't use this power more effectively to fulfill their goals. This is what I'm talking about when I say the series doesn't care. I think the overall plot has legs, but they make such strange choices for this season, weird choices that were not prevalent in part 1. The characters for the most part suffer, with a few exceptions like Yusei Crow, and heck, even Kiryu got some justice. How does Kiryu get an end to his story, but we can't even see any progression for Aki at all? The setting and the conflict between the classes that was a huge part of the series just disappears, and it feels like things are just happening strictly because it's cool and it doesn't matter if it makes sense or not. But that's all I got for you guys this time. Honestly, I like 5Ds, so I'm not making this video from a place of hate, but it's more from a place of disappointment. And I get that there are going to be people out there who are huge fans of this series that don't want to be told that this series that they glorified is not as great as they remember, and they have this incredible nuanced understanding of things that other people like me and other critics will probably say is crap in the series. But I do want to just state there is nothing wrong with admitting that something you like has an issue here and there. That is called being honest and a level-headed fan. Criticizing something doesn't mean you hate it, and I want that to be understood since I know this series has a rabid fan base because to them, this was peak Yu-Gi-Oh! But I personally refuse to look past the issues. I can say I like the series, but it has some deep issues as well. I'm not afraid to admit that something I really like actually has problems like maybe some other people would, and hopefully more people will be open to realizing, you know what, maybe this wasn't great, but I can still find a way to love it. So that's all I got for you guys. If you enjoyed the video, please like, comment, share, subscribe, do all the things that keep this channel alive, and please, more than anything, please try to be respectful in the comments section. I know this is the type of conversation that's gonna lead to some craziness, and I don't want to see people getting torn apart in it over this discussion, especially since we're likely all fans of Yu-Gi-Oh! Or even fans of 5Ds. Let's please not do this to each other. And look forward to more videos like this because I do plan to do a video of the last 2 seasons of GX. I don't know what happened there. Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5 and Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains. You guys know I want to tackle Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains and Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5, so definitely look forward to those videos. That's all I got for you guys right now. Peace out.